Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries. For nearly 3 centuries, Rhode Island residents have reported seeing a burning ship drifting silently against the wind. Local lore calls it the Palatine Light. The popular folklore describes a crew of murderous islanders luring an immigrant ship to its doom. But the supernatural ghost story is a heavily corrupted oral history, built over the remains of a real, documented merchant vessel named the Princess Augusta. To understand what happened off the coast of Rhode Island, we must strip away the folklore. By reconstructing the exact timeline of the 1738 voyage, we can trace how a documented case of disease and extortion mutated into a local myth. The objective data from the wreck establishes a harsh baseline. On December 27, 1738, the ship ran aground. By that time, the voyage had already claimed the lives of more than 200 people. Dissecting the apparition from the physical wreckage is the only way to uncover the historical trauma. The tragedy began thousands of miles away. In August 1738, the 220-ton British ship departed Rotterdam under the command of Captain George Long. The ship's manifest carried hundreds of German Palatines, immigrants from the Palatine region, who had paid for passage to the English colonies in Philadelphia. The biological catalyst for the ensuing disaster was loaded before they even left port. The ship's freshwater supply was stored in casks that had previously held red and white wine, heavily contaminating the drinking water. The tainted water immediately triggered a catastrophic outbreak of what contemporaneous records called a fever and flux among the tightly packed passengers. This chart visualizes the scale of the resulting mortality. From August to December, the illness decimated the ship, killing half the 14-man crew and more than 200 passengers. Among the dead was Captain Long himself. The sudden loss of life and leadership created a strict power vacuum on board. Command fell to First Mate Andrew Brooke, setting the stage for the documented extortion that followed. Block Island sits isolated in the Sound, presenting a severe geographic hazard to regional shipping. Under Brooke's command, the Princess Augusta never reached Philadelphia. Instead, severe storms battered the leaking vessel, pushing it far off course to the north for 3 brutal months. According to depositions taken from the surviving crew, Brooke used the desperation of the delayed voyage to his advantage. He actively forced the starving, sick passengers to pay premium prices for the ship's remaining rations. The damaged ship finally met the coastline at 2 p.m. on December 27, 1738, driven into the rocks amid a blinding winter snowstorm. The vessel grounded here at Sandy Point, on the absolute northernmost tip of the island. Following the wreck, Brooke made a highly documented, damning decision. He and his crew took the lifeboats and rowed to shore, intentionally leaving the surviving passengers trapped aboard the stranded ship overnight. Brooke's verified negligence is central to the historical record. The data shows the crew abandoned the passengers, directly contradicting the later myth that blamed the island's locals for the tragedy. The historical record is anchored by 2 conflicting archival newspaper accounts published in early 1739, mere weeks after the wreck. This transcript from the Boston Weekly Postboy, dated January 1739, outlines the immense financial stakes: a 300-ton ship carrying cargo valued at £20,000 sterling. It also contains a severe accusation. Publishers claimed the islanders engaged in extortion, confiscating the passengers' remaining gold. Exactly 1 week later, the Boston Evening Post published a contradictory report. This second dispatch argues that the hull and the vast majority of the goods were entirely lost to the ocean, heavily refuting the claims of organized theft by the locals. Despite these early accounts and subsequent attempts at salvage, no physical remains of the ship's hull were ever definitively located. Even the passenger counts vary wildly between these primary sources, with estimates ranging from 240 to roughly 400 people. The friction between these initial media reports, one alleging local extortion, the other citing an absolute loss at sea, formed the immediate foundation for the enduring wrecker myth. Over the next century, the memory of the Princess Augusta fractured into 2 distinct competing oral traditions. The island tradition insisted their citizens made valiant, selfless efforts to rescue the trapped passengers from Brooke's abandoned ship and retrieve their frozen goods. The mainland tradition took a darker path. It accused the islanders of being murderous wreckers who lit false beacon fires on the high bluffs to purposefully crash the ship and violently loot the cargo. Both versions share a single, specific anomaly: the story of Mary Vanderline, a passenger allegedly driven mad by the ordeal, who refused to leave the ship and burned alive when the wreckage was eventually scuttled. The turning point for the legend occurred in 1867, when the poet John Greenleaf Whittier published a piece in the Atlantic Monthly. His poem, The Palatine, heavily popularized the mainland narrative. It codified the slander of the malicious, thieving wrecker into permanent public memory. Whittier's literature was so culturally dominant that it effectively erased the ship's real name. The Princess Augusta was forgotten, replaced entirely by the mythic Palatine. The legend persists today. On the Saturday between Christmas and New Year's Eve, locals still occasionally report a burning ship sailing past the island. But investigating these sightings requires moving away from the supernatural and looking at the recorded optical physics of the region. The primary scientific explanation for the apparition is a complex mirage known as a Fata Morgana. This chart shows how the illusion works. During extreme winter temperature inversions, cold air is trapped under warm air. This thermal layering physically bends light rays across the ocean, projecting distorted, floating images of distant modern ships to an observer on the shore. There is also a secondary scientific hypothesis that accounts for the specific reports of flames. Pockets of naturally occurring methane gas releasing from the sound, or dense patches of bioluminescence, can ignite or glow, appearing as a distant, traveling fire against the dark water. The recurring ghost is local weather and rare optical phenomena. Over time, the community simply mapped these visual anomalies onto the existing historical trauma of the 1738 wreck. Returning to the physical reality of the Block Island shoreline brings the scale of the actual event back into focus. In 1947, the Historical Society placed a marker near Sandy Point. It reads simply, Palatine Graves, 1738. The disaster was a cascade of human error and biological failure. Contaminated drinking water killed hundreds at sea, and a negligent first mate abandoned the survivors to the winter storm. But mainland economic suspicion, coupled with 19th century poetry, weaponized this tragedy into a false accusation of local piracy. Natural atmospheric illusions off the coast provided just enough visual proof to sustain that myth for nearly 3 centuries. The spectacle of a burning ghost ship distracts from the hundreds of German immigrants who died searching for a new life, and who remain buried anonymously under the soil at Sandy Point. The true tragedy of the Princess Augusta is how easily a verifiable human disaster was overwritten by a more entertaining supernatural fiction.